When my only son drained the savings I spent 20 years and 3 jobs building for him, I did not yell. I handed him his favorite mug of coffee, smiled like nothing had changed, and let him believe I was too tired to fight. By the time he realized what I was really doing, the only thing he truly cared about was gone, and I made sure he knew why. Some dreams are worth protecting, even from the very people you sacrifice everything for. You will not believe how I turned the tables. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell me what you would do if you were in my shoes. My name is Robert Halstead. I am 74 now, my hair silvered to the color of winter frost, my hands thick and worn from decades of labor that never truly left the muscles even in rest. In the small Midwestern town of Rockford, Illinois, everyone knew me as the quiet man with the bent shoulders, who waved politely from his porch, but rarely spoke of the life that had shaped him. "Dad, you ever think about just taking it easy?" Evan once asked, leaning in the doorway as I laced up my boots for another night shift. "Taking it easy is how things slip away," I replied without looking up. Back in my 50s, when most men slowed their pace, I began working the night janitor shift at the high school 2 blocks from home. The building was empty at that hour, silent except for the hum of the vending machines and the squeak of my mop across the floor. I moved from hallway to hallway, scrubbing until the tile shone, the chemical sting of bleach clinging to my clothes long after I left, the sound of my footsteps echoing off lockers that had long since been emptied for the day. It was not glamorous, not even close, but it was steady, and every paycheck went into a separate account with Evan's name on it. "Why do you smell like cleaning stuff all the time?" Evan had once asked, wrinkling his nose when he hugged me. I smiled faintly. "Because I am building you a future you cannot smell yet." Then, when the school year ended, I did not rest. Holidays became delivery season, and I climbed into a dented old van at dawn, the cold seeping through the floorboards as I navigated icy roads with coffee burning my tongue and the radio playing faint Christmas music. Snow blurred the windshield. My breath fogged the glass, but I kept going, hauling boxes up steps, slick with frost, ringing doorbells with numb fingers, and smiling at strangers, because each tip, no matter how small, was another brick laid in the foundation of the future I was building. On those days, my back ached in ways I never told anyone about. My knees protested each climb, and yet I pushed on, telling myself no price was too high when the reward was seeing my son succeed. At night, when the world was quiet, I sat at the kitchen table under the hum of a single bulb, clipping coupons with a slow precision, trimming each edge neatly as though order on the page might create order in the future. I added up savings on a yellow notepad before writing tuition checks in a hand that ached but never shook, each check feeling like a promise carved out of my own skin. "One day, he will understand what it took," I often told myself, imagining. The moment Evan realized just how much had been poured into his chance at life, that thought kept me warm on the loneliest nights. The nights when exhaustion pressed down like a heavy coat and every instinct begged me to stop when the snow outside piled high against the door and the house creaked with winter. There were times my hands were so chapped from the cold that holding the pen hurt. Times the van's heater broke and I drove in layers of jackets, my breath a ghost in the cab, but I never allowed myself to quit. When the acceptance letter came, the envelope thick and official, I held it in both hands for a long moment before tearing it open. The words swam in my eyes as I read them, and before I knew it, tears spilled down my cheeks, hot and unsteady, falling onto the paper and blurring the ink. "Dad, you okay?" Evan asked, more curious than concerned. "Never better," I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. I cried harder than Evan did, harder than I had in years, because in that moment every mile driven, every floor scrubbed, every coupon clipped had led here. I believed, with all the stubborn faith of a man who built his life on sacrifice, that this was the start of something unbreakable between us, a bond forged in sweat and quiet devotion. I did not notice, not then, the way Evan's thank you felt light, almost absent, as if it were a social requirement instead of a truth pulled from the heart. I did not see, not yet, how the seeds of distance had already been planted in the soil of our relationship, how years of giving had built not gratitude, but a quiet expectation, a subtle belief that such sacrifices were not extraordinary, but simply the way things should be. In that moment, I only saw my boy, tall and eager, holding his future in his hands, and I thought that nothing, no distance, no hardship, no passing years, could ever turn us against each other. I learned much later that the same dream that had kept me alive through the hardest winters would be used as the first weapon to cut me down, and that the future I had built with such care would one day be held against me by the very son for whom it was built. The first time I noticed something had shifted between us was a year into college, when Evan came home for Thanksgiving break. It was in the little things, like how he no longer lingered in the kitchen after dinner, how he checked his phone more, that he met my eyes, and how the stories he told about his new life were full of people I had never met and places I would never see. "You must be proud of yourself, Dad," Evan said casually, leaning back in his chair one evening. "Most parents cannot pull off what you did." I smiled, but there was a hollowness to it. "Proud of you, son," I replied. Yet inside, I felt a faint sting, as if the recognition was not for the sacrifices, but for an abstract accomplishment, like winning a raffle. That winter, my delivery routes were longer and the snowstorms heavier, but I did not slow down. I drove for hours, picturing the graduation ceremony and Evan taking his degree, maybe even spotting me in the crowd and giving a nod of thanks. By the second year, the calls from Evan came less often, and when they did, they were short and transactional. "Hey, Dad, I need an extra 1,000 for books." "Dad, my rent went up this semester." There was never much talk of how I was doing, never a question about my health or my work. I told myself it was just the busy life of a young man trying to make his way, but late at night, while clipping coupons under that same dim bulb, the thought crept in that he was starting to see my help as a given. The old conversations we used to have about baseball, fishing trips, even just the weather, had been replaced by numbers and due dates. One summer evening, I suggested a weekend at the lake, just like old times. "Dad, that is kind of old-fashioned," Evan said with a faint, dismissive laugh. "I have got plans with friends. You know how it is." I only nodded, masking the way the words landed like a dull blade in my chest. I still sent the tuition checks, still worked the night shifts, still kept the account healthy. But the pride I once felt in writing those checks began to fade into something heavier, the slow realization that perhaps the bond I thought we shared was thinner than I had believed. Then came the first sign of something darker. I had been reviewing my savings account late one night, double-checking balances as I often did, when I noticed a withdrawal I had not made. It was not much at first, only a few $100s, and I told myself it could be a simple bank error. I called the bank in the morning. "Mr. Halstead, the transfer was authorized through your joint account," the woman on the line explained politely. "From your son, Evan." My hand tightened on the phone, but I kept my voice calm. Right, it must have slipped my mind. I hung up and stared at the numbers on the page, wondering why he would not just ask me. The following week, Evan visited for the weekend, breezing in with a duffel bag and a new jacket I knew was not cheap. "Nice coat," I said evenly. "Yeah, it is from this boutique near campus," Evan replied, grinning. "Kind of a splurge, but I needed to treat myself, you know." I only smiled. I did not mention the transfer. Instead, I tested the waters. "How is your budget holding up?" Evan shrugged. "Tight, but I figure you have always got my back." The words were casual, almost joking, but to me, they sounded like a quiet declaration of expectation, not of gratitude. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind push against the siding. I thought about the years of work, the cold mornings, the aching knees, all poured into a future that now seemed to be slipping from my grasp. I remembered the acceptance letter, the tears, the certainty that we would always stand on the same side. Now there was a gap between us, not wide enough to name, but wide enough to feel, and I sensed that if I did not act, that gap would become a chasm. Still, I held my tongue. The time for speaking would come later, when the truth could do its work, not out of cruelty, but out of the belief that some lessons must be learned the hard way. For now, I would watch, wait, and keep my cards close. The snow had begun to fall. Again, by the time Evan left that weekend, his tires crunching over the icy driveway. I stood at the window until the taillights disappeared, my reflection staring back at me in the glass, an older man, tired but far from beaten. I whispered into the empty room, "You have no idea what is coming." And in the silence that followed, I felt the first steady ember of resolve begin to burn. By Evan's third year in college, the distance was not just in the calls or the visits. It was in his tone, in the way he spoke to me, like I was an obligation rather than a father. I noticed the calls usually came right before tuition deadlines, or when his rent was due. That fall, I got a letter from my bank asking me to confirm a change to my account access. I had not requested anything, so I called immediately. "Yes, Mr. Halstead," the banker explained politely. "We received an online request to add your son as a full access holder on your savings account. We just need your verbal confirmation to proceed." My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles went pale. "No," I said slowly. "Do not make any changes. And please note this request as unauthorized." I hung up without further explanation and stared at the faded kitchen wallpaper, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly loud in the room. That night, I called Evan. "Did you try to change something with my account?" I asked evenly. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Dad, it is just easier if I can move the money when I need it." "You are always working or sleeping." My jaw clenched. "That is not how this works, son." Evan's sigh was heavy, the kind reserved for teenagers who think they are being lectured. "Fine, whatever. I was just trying to save us both some time." The call ended soon after, and I sat in the dark long after the screen went black, hearing those words on repeat. Save us both some time. In the following months, I worked harder than ever, picking up extra shifts to keep up with tuition, rent, and Evan's casual requests for just a little more this month. But then, one snowy January morning, a letter arrived from the bursar's office. I frowned, opening it with the usual expectation of a receipt or a request for the next installment. Instead, the words on the page felt like a blow to the ribs. "Final notice. Your son, Evan Halstead, has been placed on academic probation and is no longer enrolled for the current semester due to non-payment." I read it twice, then a third time, my breath slow and heavy. I called the school immediately. "There must be some mistake," I said. The woman on the line explained that Evan had not only failed to pay, but had withdrawn from several classes without informing the administration. "Is there any way to reinstate him?" I asked. The answer was polite but firm. No payment meant no reinstatement. I sat there, the phone pressed to my ear long after the call had ended, trying to stitch the facts together. I had paid every tuition bill on time. I had sent extra money when asked. So where had it all gone? That weekend, I drove the 2 hours to Evan's off-campus apartment without warning. The building was noisy, full of loud music and cigarette smoke, the kind of place that swelled with late-night parties. When Evan opened the door, His eyes widened briefly before settling into a practiced smile. "Dad, what are you doing here?" I stepped inside, my eyes scanning the expensive stereo system, the gaming consoles, and the designer sneakers lined up neatly against the wall. "Looks like you have been doing well," I said evenly. Evan shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "Just enjoying life, Dad. You only live once." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the letter from the university, placing it silently on the coffee table. Evan's smirk faltered. "It is not what it looks like," he said quickly. "I just needed a break from classes. They were stressing me out." My voice was calm, almost too calm. "And the money?" "The money I sent for your tuition?" Evan shifted in his seat. "I used some of it for other things." "You do not understand, Dad. I needed to feel like I was living, not just grinding away." I stared at him, the years of sacrifice suddenly feeling like a crushing weight on my chest. The long nights mopping floors, the icy mornings on delivery runs, the meals I skipped so the checks would not bounce, all for a boy who now spoke about living as if responsibility were a chain. For a moment, I considered shouting and demanding answers, maybe even cutting him off then and there. But something inside me shifted instead. I thought about the bank request, the withdrawals, the parties, the clothes. I thought about the slow erosion of our conversations and the subtle transformation of gratitude into entitlement. And I saw with chilling clarity that Evan did not just take my support for granted. He believed it was his right. "I understand perfectly," I said finally, my voice flat. "More than you know." I stood up, my eyes briefly meeting his. "You will see just how much I understand soon enough." Without another word, I walked out, the cold air biting at my face as I stepped into the snow. Driving home, I felt something new settling in my chest, not the dull ache of disappointment, but the sharp, focused heat of resolve. It was the kind of resolve that does not fade overnight, the kind that waits, watches, and plans. I drove home through the snow without turning on the radio, the wipers scraping rhythmically against the glass. Every mile gave me more clarity. I was not just hurt. I was done being used. But I was not about to explode and burn the bridge between us. No, bridges are far more useful if you let the other person walk across them while you control the fire underneath. The first step was information. I began combing through every bank statement, every receipt, and every email from the university. I found the withdrawals lined up perfectly with holidays, concert dates, and big sales at the local mall. Evan was not careless. He was calculated. He had siphoned off tuition money in small amounts, careful enough that I never saw a single overdraft notice. I sat at the kitchen table night after night, making notes in a small, leather-bound journal I had owned since my 20s. I wrote down dates, amounts, and anything Evan had told me during those weeks. It was like building a puzzle of betrayal, each piece snapping into place until the full picture was too sharp to ignore. During the day, I kept up appearances. I still answered Evan's calls and still sent smaller amounts when he asked. But now I kept every message, every bank transfer confirmation, every casual thanks, Dad, text. One Thursday evening, while cleaning up after my delivery shift, my coworker Harold noticed me lost in thought. "You look like a man with something heavy on his mind," Harold said, stacking pizza boxes. I just smiled faintly. "Just making sure my son's future is secure." Harold nodded, not realizing the double meaning. I started visiting a lawyer in a neighboring town, someone I had met years ago when sorting out my own parents' estate. We met in a small office above a bakery, the smell of fresh bread drifting through the vents. "I need to make changes to my will," I explained, sliding a thick folder across the desk. "But I do not want my son to know." "Not yet." The lawyer glanced through the documents, raising an eyebrow at the meticulous records. "You have been preparing for a while." I nodded. I have been working for this boy's dreams since before he could walk. And now I am going to make sure those dreams come with a price. The lawyer did not ask more questions. Instead, he began drafting what I requested, a trust that would only be accessible if strict conditions were met. If Evan met them, he would get the full amount. If he failed, the money would be redirected to a scholarship fund in my late wife's name. I knew Evan would never meet those conditions, not with the way he lived, but that was the point. Over the next few months, I played the part of the forgiving father. I even helped Evan with the paperwork to re-enroll in classes, covering the first month's rent for a new apartment closer to campus. "I appreciate it, Dad," Evan said one afternoon, sipping coffee across from me at a diner. "I know I messed up before, but I am back on track now." I smiled, stirring my coffee slowly. "I am glad to hear that, son. Just remember, the choices you make now will stick with you longer than you think." Evan waved off the comment, launching into a story about a party the weekend before. I listened, nodding, making mental notes of the names and dates Evan mentioned. Every detail might be useful later. In April, I made another quiet move. I sold the small rental property my brother had left me years ago, a place Evan did not even know existed. The sale added a comfortable cushion to my savings, but more importantly, it gave me the liquidity I needed for the final step of my plan. I moved half of it into an account Evan could see, one that made it look like my finances were unchanged. The other half went into a secure investment account only the lawyer and I knew about. If Evan tried to pull anything again, it would lead him to the wrong pile entirely. The final piece came together in June, when I overheard Evan bragging to a friend on speakerphone, "Nah, my dad is not going anywhere. He will always cover me. That is what dads do. Besides, the old man is too soft to cut me off." I was sitting at my kitchen table, the phone on the counter, as I sorted through bills. I did not move, did not make a sound, just let the words settle into the deepest part of me. That night, I called the lawyer. "It is time," I said simply. "Put everything in motion." I want it airtight. "Understood," the lawyer replied. "He will not see it coming." I hung up and leaned back in my chair. The plan was set. Evan still thought he was untouchable, but I knew the truth, and soon Evan would too. He was about to learn a lifelong lesson, the kind that leaves a mark for good. The summer heat pressed down like a weight, but my focus stayed sharp. Revenge was not about striking fast. It was about letting the other person walk right into the trap, believing they were safe. The first thread I pulled was financial. I began quietly closing the smaller accounts that Evan had access to, transferring their balances into the trust my lawyer had set up. The changes were invisible from Evan's side. The online portal still showed pending balances, which I knew would confuse him later. Each move was timed, so nothing looked suspicious. In August, I paid a surprise visit to Evan's apartment, carrying a bag of groceries. "Dad, you did not have to bring all this," Evan said, stepping aside. I smiled warmly. "I had some extra. Thought you could use it." The kitchen was cluttered with takeout boxes, and a pile of unopened mail sat on the counter. My eyes scanned the envelopes, overdue notices, credit card bills, a letter from the university's bursar. I did not comment. Instead, I opened the fridge, put away the food, and asked about his classes. "It is fine, Dad. I have got it handled," Evan said, avoiding my eyes. I nodded. "Good. It is funny how life gives you chances to set things right. You just have to take them." Evan chuckled nervously. "Yeah, right?" That night, I pulled the bursar's number from an envelope I remembered and called anonymously. I learned Evan was behind on payments again. Not enough to trigger a drop, but enough to leave a black mark if it went unpaid. I paid the minimum to keep Evan enrolled, then had the receipt sent directly to the lawyer. Every dollar I spent was now part of a paper trail building toward something bigger. In September, I attended a small fundraiser at the community center, something I had not done in years. I made a sizable donation in my late wife's name, requesting the funds go toward scholarships for working-class students. The director, a woman named Marline, was grateful. "We have been needing someone to kickstart the program," she said. I just smiled, happy to help. What I did not tell her was that the scholarship was written with one disqualifying clause: any applicant with a criminal record involving fraud or theft was automatically barred. I knew Evan's habits. All it would take was one mistake, and not only would he lose the trust, but he would be publicly ineligible for something tied to his own mother's name. By October, I noticed small cracks in Evan's confidence. Calls came later in the day with less energy. "Hey, Dad, I might need a little extra this month," Evan said one Tuesday evening. "Things are just tight." I sipped my tea. "Of course. But I need you to send me receipts from last month. You know, just for my records." There was a pause on the other end. "Yeah, sure," Evan said quickly, changing the subject. I made a note. I knew Evan would either ignore the request or fabricate something sloppy. Either way, it was another thread to pull later. That same week, I visited Harold at the pizza shop. "You still know that guy who runs the background checks?" I asked. Harold raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, why?" I shrugged casually. "Thinking about hiring some help for odd jobs around the house. Want to make sure I am careful." The truth was, I intended to keep quiet tabs on Evan's financial and legal behavior. I did not have to dig long. By November, the reports showed Evan had taken out 2 short-term loans with predatory interest rates. I smiled to myself. The noose was tightening exactly as planned. Thanksgiving came and went with little warmth. I hosted dinner, but the conversation was surface level. At one point, while clearing dishes, Evan wandered into the kitchen. "Dad, I know I have not always been the best son," he began. I dried my hands on a towel. "We all make choices, Evan. What matters is what we do next." Evan nodded but said nothing more. That night, after everyone had left, I sat alone at the table, the ticking clock the only sound in the house. I opened my journal and wrote a single line: "He still thinks I will save him." In December, I set the final stage. I arranged for the trust's activation date to coincide with Evan's graduation, or, if he failed to graduate, the forfeiture date. Either way, the event would trigger a legal process Evan could not stop. The beauty of it was that Evan would not even know until the moment arrived, thinking he was simply walking into another payday. "Are you ready for the holidays?" the lawyer asked during our last meeting before Christmas. I smiled faintly. More ready than he is. Snow began falling outside the window, soft and quiet, covering the streets in white. I imagined the silence that would follow when Evan realized what he had done to himself. Not rage, not pleading, just the heavy, cold awareness that the man he thought was too soft to fight back had been preparing his defeat for months. And I would be there to watch it all happen. Graduation day arrived in late May, a Saturday drenched in perfect spring sunshine that felt like a postcard from another life. The day passed in a profound and heavy silence. My phone remained quiet on the kitchen counter. I spent the afternoon in the garden, pulling weeds with a slow, deliberate rhythm, my thoughts as orderly as the rows of young tomato plants. A strange calm had settled over me, the kind that follows a great storm when the sky is finally clear. I was not waiting for a fight. I was waiting for the story to reach its end. A week later, just as I was finishing my morning coffee, the sound of his car engine broke the neighborhood's peace. From the kitchen window, I watched Evan's silver sedan, a vehicle I helped him buy, pull into my driveway. He exited the car with a theatrical slowness and adjusted the collar of his shirt, a man performing confidence for a small audience. In his hand, he clutched a rolled-up piece of paper tied with a cheap-looking red ribbon. He walked up the porch steps with a buoyant stride and opened the front door without knocking, a habit he never outgrew. "Dad, I did it," he announced, his voice echoing in the small entryway. His smile was wide and practiced, the one he used when he wanted something from me. I met him in the living room, my own expression carefully neutral. "Coffee is fresh," I said, gesturing toward the kitchen. The old ritual felt alien now, weighted by the unspoken truths hanging between us. He followed me, launching into a breathless monologue about his bright future. He spoke of a sleek apartment he wanted in downtown Chicago, a place with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the lake. He detailed his plans for a celebratory trip across Europe, tossing out names like Barcelona and Rome as if they were neighboring towns. It was a fantasy painted in broad, expensive strokes, a future built entirely on a resource he had already exhausted. I allowed him to talk, refilling his mug, my silence serving as a blank canvas for his elaborate dreams. He finally paused, taking a sip of coffee, his eyes shining with raw anticipation. "So," he began, leaning forward with a conspiratorial air, "the nest egg, I figure we can visit the bank on Monday. There is a down payment I need to make for that apartment." The silence in the room stretched for a long moment before I stood up. "I have a graduation gift for you as well, Evan," I said, my voice so quiet it made him lean in closer. I walked over to the old wooden secretary desk in the corner, a piece of furniture that belonged to my own father. From its deepest drawer, I retrieved the worn, leather-bound journal and a manila folder so thick it bulged at the seams. I placed them on the kitchen table with a soft thud that made him jump. "What is all of this?" he asked, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. I sat back down across from him, the table feeling like a great battlefield. "This," I began, opening the folder, "is an accounting of your choices." I slid the first page across the table. It was a bank statement from his freshman year, dated the week of his first spring break. 2 separate withdrawals were highlighted in bright yellow ink. "I recall this week," I said softly. "You told me you were staying on campus to study. For midterms. You said you needed extra money for books." I watched his eyes scan the paper, his composure starting to crack. Mentioning the beach photos his friends posted online was entirely unnecessary. I followed it with another sheet. "And this was from the summer of your unpaid internship. I sent you money for rent and food. It seems a lot of it funded concert tickets and a new stereo system." I continued, page after page, document after document. Each one was a heavy stone laid on the path of his deception. I presented the overdue notices from the university that were sent to a secret P.O. box he opened. I showed him the printouts of his failing grades for classes he swore he was ACing. I laid out the copies of the high-interest loan agreements he had taken out, his signature scrawled at the bottom of each one. The entire sordid timeline of his irresponsibility was laid bare on my kitchen table. His confident smile had long since dissolved, replaced by a pale, slack-jawed shock. His face was a mask of disbelief, his breathing shallow and quick. "Dad, I can explain this," he stammered, his hand hovering over the papers as if he could. "Make them disappear. This is not what it looks like." "It is exactly what it looks like," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the rage he surely expected. "This is a record of your actions." I finally pushed the leather-bound journal toward him. "And this is my own record. It details every phone call, every lie, every dollar you took and what you spent it on." He stared at the journal, his final shield of denial crumbling into fine dust. He understood in that instant that this was not a sudden burst of anger. This was a verdict delivered after a long and meticulous trial. I had a trust set up for you, I continued, my voice taking on a new final tone. It contained every dollar from the night shifts, the delivery routes, and the coupons I clipped at this very table. My entire life's extra work was in one place, all for you. His head snapped up, a desperate, wild flicker of hope igniting in his eyes. So it is still there. The money is safe? I leaned back in my chair and looked at him, truly seeing the chasm between the son I wanted and the man sitting before me. The trust came with two simple conditions. You had to graduate with a clean academic record, and you had to do it without accumulating any personal debt. You only had to do the one thing you promised me you were doing. You only had to earn it. I let those words sink into the heavy air between us. He shook his head in a frantic, pleading motion. Dad, please. I know I messed up, but you cannot do this. You cannot. I did not do this, Evan. You did, I said, my voice becoming as hard as steel. The trust had a forfeiture clause. It was activated this morning after the lawyer confirmed you failed to meet the terms. The money is gone. Gone where? He whispered, his voice cracking, the sound of a spoiled child realizing the game was finally over. It now fully funds the Eleanor Halstead Memorial Scholarship, I replied, feeling a clean, sharp pang of righteous closure. It will go to students from this town, students who actually have to work for a living. It will go to people who will honor your mother's memory, not use it as a line of credit. The last bit of color drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, lifeless gray. For a full minute he said nothing, as the full enormity of his loss crashed down upon him. After that, the shock gave way to a wave of pure, unadulterated rage. Why did you do this to me? He roared, slamming his fist on the table so hard the coffee mugs jumped. After everything I went through? That was my money. You owed me that. I owed you nothing. I shouted back, my own control finally shattering, the years of suppressed pain erupting to the surface. That money was never yours. It was my sweat on a factory floor. It was my aching back on an icy porch. It was my lonely nights mopping floors while you were out spending my sacrifice. It was a gift, Evan, a gift you were too arrogant and too selfish to appreciate, and now that gift is gone forever. He stared at me, his chest heaving, his face contorted with fury and disbelief. He looked at the man he had dismissed as a simple, soft old man, and he finally saw the truth. He saw the quiet observer who had documented every lie. He saw the planner who built a better future for strangers out of the ruins of the one his own son destroyed. The fight visibly drained from him, his anger collapsing into the hollow, empty posture of total defeat. He knew there were no more moves to make. His game had been lost, completely and irrevocably. Without another word, he turned and walked out the door, leaving the faked, ribbon-tied diploma sitting on the table like a cheap party favor. I listened to his car start, the engine revving far too high, before the tires screeched out of the driveway and down the street. I stood there in the silence of the kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of my son's betrayal and my own painful victory. I did not feel the thrill of revenge, only the profound, quiet sorrow of a father who had just amputated a part of his own heart to save himself. For the first few days after Evan left, the house felt cavernously silent. Every creak of the floorboards and every hum from the refrigerator seemed to echo in the space he had once filled. I would find myself pausing, listening for the sound of his car in the driveway, a reflex carved into me by years of waiting up for him, but the sound never came. Slowly, methodically, I began the process of cleaning up. I gathered the bank statements and legal documents from the kitchen table, stacking them neatly before placing them back into the thick folder. I picked up the fake diploma, its cheap paper feeling flimsy and pathetic in my hands, and I dropped it into the trash without a second thought. This was not an act of anger, but an act of reclaiming my space, my life. The folder went into a lockbox in the attic, a closed chapter one had no desire to reread. The following week, I called Marlene, the director at the community center, and arranged a meeting. When I walked into her office, she greeted me with a warm smile. "Robert, it is so good to see you," she said. "Your donation has already generated so much excitement." "I am here to finalize it," I said, taking a seat. I spent the next hour with her and the center's financial advisor, signing the final papers that transferred the full balance of the trust into the scholarship fund. It was a staggering amount, enough to change the lives of dozens of students for years to come. As I signed the last document, I felt a lightness in my chest, a sense of purpose I had not felt in a very long time. The money, once a symbol of my sacrifice for a son who felt nothing, was now a symbol of hope for strangers who had earned it. I had not destroyed a future. I had simply redirected it to where it would be valued. Life began to find a new rhythm. The night shifts were long gone, and I woke with the sun, not with an alarm clock. I started spending my mornings in the garage, a space I had long neglected, and began woodworking again. My hands, once worn from mopping floors, now found purpose in shaping oak and pine. I built a rocking chair, just like the one I had made for Eleanor when we were first married. I restored an old chest of drawers for Harold's granddaughter. Each finished piece felt like a small act of creation, a pushing back against the destruction that had marked the last few years. I reconnected with Harold, not just as a coworker, but as a friend. We started having breakfast together on Tuesdays at the local diner. We did not talk about Evan. We talked about baseball, about the rising price of lumber, about the old days. It was simple, easy, and real. One afternoon, Harold mentioned he had heard some news. "My nephew saw Evan," he said, stirring his coffee with a delicate hesitation. "He is working at one of those big box stores out by the highway, living in some small apartment complex over there." I nodded, taking a slow sip of my own coffee. I felt no surge of satisfaction, no cruel flicker of joy. There was only a quiet, somber acknowledgement of cause and effect. Evan was facing the natural consequences of his actions, living a life defined not by my sacrifices, but by his own choices. His struggle was his own to navigate now. I had given him every advantage, and he had squandered them. His new life was not my punishment, it was his reality. That fall, Marlene invited me to a small ceremony at the community center to announce the first recipients of the Eleanor Halstead Memorial Scholarship. I stood at the back of the room, content to be an anonymous observer. I watched as a young woman, a nursing student working 2 jobs to get by, accepted the award with tears in her eyes. I saw a young man, the first in his family to attend college, shake the director's hand with a look of stunned, life-altering gratitude. In their faces, I saw the reflection of my own past, of Eleanor's belief in hard work. I saw the true value of what I had built. After the ceremony, the nursing student came over to me. Marlene had pointed me out as the fund's benefactor. "Mr. Halstead," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I do not have the words. You have no idea what this means. This changes everything for me. Just do good work with it," I said, my own voice a little unsteady. "That is all the thanks I need." Driving home that evening, the autumn, leaves swirling across the road, I finally understood the nature of my revenge. It was not about the confrontation at the kitchen table. It was not about Evan's fall from grace. The sweet revenge was in this moment. It was in the quiet peace of my own home, in the smell of sawdust on my hands, in the knowledge that my life's work had found a worthy home. It was in taking the love and energy I had poured into a broken vessel and using it to build something beautiful and lasting in my wife's name. I had lost a son, that much was true, but I had found myself again. I had reclaimed my life from the shadows of his entitlement and stepped back into the light of my own making. That is how I got my so sweet revenge, and I would do it all over again. Please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment telling me what part of the story made you the most angry, and what you would do if you were in my situation.